So, October international break again. So, let's look back at the Bundesliga. Friday was Hoffenheim-Cologne, and it ended 1-0 to Cologne, with Said Almada scoring a solo goal where he basically dribbled half the Hoffenheim defence. And so I think you can quite confidently say that Almada is probably Cologne's best player since Florian Wirtz. Obviously, Almada didn't come from the academy, but he's from Cologne, and he is most likely, objectively speaking, their best player since Wirtz. And so they obviously need to make sure they avoid making the same mistake they did with Wirtz, which was just letting him leave. Obviously, teams from abroad have already started to show interest in him, but that's most likely going to be a step too far. So I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up at the Bundesliga team, like a good Bundesliga team, well, within the next 2 years. Because the way that he's progressing already, and that goal just kind of sums it up as well, is he can quite comfortably deal with this quality already. And obviously the win for Cologne now means they're up to 4th. But it really does beg the question, what is actually their level? How good are they actually? Because if you look at all the teams they faced, the only difficult one was Leipzig, which they lost. And apart from that, they've played teams that are currently mid or lower in the table. So it's still quite hard to pinpoint how good are Cologne exactly. Because after the international break, they do start to encounter more difficult teams, which will then start to show, are they actually a surprise team for Europe, or was their schedule on their side? But obviously it's a credit to the work that Lukas Kwasniok has done so far, that he's got them in the top 4, and they're a newly promoted side as well. But again, if you look at their squad, obviously they are overperforming. That's clear. But if you look at their squad is meant to be in the Bundesliga, while Hoffenheim continue to be quite confusing. So Dortmund played Leipzig on Saturday, and that was their first big test in the Bundesliga. I mean, they played pretty average sides as well up until now, and even in the Champions League, and the only team that they played in the Champions League was Juventus. It was really a case of, okay, can this Dortmund side actually compete? And will they be able to challenge Bayern? And they struggled against Leipzig. I mean, they conceded early on from Christoph Baumgart, but they managed to show resilience to come back into the game. Jan Kut scored the equaliser. But apart from that, the front line really struggled to get into the game, most notably Serhou Guirassy. And even when they brought Julian Brandt on, they were not able to really create anything. And it was really a game where you thought maybe, you just throw on Chukwuemeka as well and hope you can create something. But they weren't able to. But also it's a credit to Leipzig, as obviously they started the season with a 6-0 thrashing by Bayern Munich. And you're really thinking, okay, his back's against the wall already. But then they won 4 games in a row, and they were able to draw with Dortmund as well, where you could quite comfortably argue that they were probably the better side as well for most of the game. As I said beforehand, that Bayern game just came too early for them. They all knew with each other. The attack was new, all the players were new. They still have players who ended up leaving in Openda and Simmons, and so it was really all a bit of a mess. But now they're already starting to build with one another, get used to one another. Obviously, the lack of European football helps as well, as it helped here because, they came into this game fresh, while Dortmund had to play Bilbao in midweek. And so they're continuing to grow now as a team, and I particularly like the front 3 of Johan Bakayoko, Romelu and Yandi Mande. I think on the eye they're a lot better than, I'm not saying they're better players, but they're a lot better than Šeško, Openda and Simmons. But now for Dortmund, the Leipzig game was their first big test. But the next game is the biggest test they will face. It's Bayern Munich in Munich. This is a game where notoriously they've been quite bad up until the past 2 years, where they've won and then drawn. As long as Dortmund do not do what they normally do in this situation and just kind of roll over for Bayern, we can now, from this game, we can then begin to draw conclusions of how good are Dortmund actually. Can they actually challenge Bayern? Can they go toe-to-toe with Bayern? Can all this hype we've been waiting for and building up for the past few weeks, it will finally be all proven there, and then are Bayern good enough? Or are Bayern so dominant of the league? Was it just the fact that they had quite a relatively easy schedule? Stuff like that. And we'll get those answers after the international break. And I think what may if we're talking about marginal gains here, I think what will help Dortmund is the fact they have less players on international duty, like less of their important players are away compared to Bayern's. But obviously this was a learning curve for Dortmund. Like they need to do better in these type of games, and it did show their weaknesses, which you now have to look at addressing before you play Bayern after the international break. Leverkusen also played on Saturday. They beat Union Berlin 2-0. Obviously, the attackers have been like a bit of a sticking point for Leverkusen recently, and they've kind of heavily relied on Grimaldo. But finally, like their attackers have come good. You know, Christian Kafana and Ernst Poku both scores, and both were like standouts in their own right. I mean, Poku scored last weekend as well, and he scored now this weekend. Kafana scored in midweek and scored now as well. And Kafana's probably the most important, as in the absence of Patrick Schick, who's injured, he's the only recognised striker that Leverkusen actually have. Leverkusen kind of need him until Schick returns, but he's actually had a bit more of an impact than Schick has in the opening few games, which is quite telling. Poku he just brings an immense amount of speed, which Leverkusen have lacked since Jeremy Frimpong left. However, the other attackers, Malik Tillman, Elis Ben Sagir, Claudia Echeverri, whatever, they all need to start stepping up as well, because they bring more of like the creative edge and spark compared to Kafana and Poku. And like Leverkusen is still an unfinished product here. But the positive for Leverkusen is the international break, because this will be the first period, like Kasper Højlund now has 2 weeks with the team, because he joined right at the end of the September international break, so he had no time to like try and instill a style of play in the team or whatever. So now he has an uninterrupted 2 weeks that he can use and try and hone a style of play and get these players up to how he wants them to play. Because one thing is certain is that this Leverkusen side so far has been completely different. And I mean, like a complete different world from how Alonso played. They've gone from dominating the ball to being dominated and having to go on the counter. The only reason they were so dominant in this game is because they played Union, who are basically anti-football. And they just do everything on the counter. So how Leverkusen come out after the international break will be the most interesting thing. Then we go on to the Battle of the Bergs, Augsburg versus Wolfsburg. Augsburg won this game 3-1, so they'd gone on a 5-game winless run after they won on the opening day against Freiburg. They were able to beat Wolfsburg this time, and this was a bit like similar to their win against Freiburg in the fact they were quite clinical in front of goal, and they weren't the standout best team either. Do they still have a clear identity? No. But this does reduce the doubts of Sandro Wagner, who was beginning to feel the heat because of this 5-game winless run. But they still don't have like a standout identity. And you still can't be like, okay, this is how Augsburg play. However, on the flip side, Paul Simonis is now being questioned because he replaced Ralph Hasenhüttl, who was fired before the end of last season, and he comes in after doing this great job in the Netherlands, and Wolfsburg have just been distinctly average. And it's the fact that he hasn't even started Christian Eriksen yet. Obviously, he's had no pre-season, so he kind of needs to build up match fitness and whatever, and so this international break will help. This team's clearly lacking in some departments, and like it's kind of basically Amora and everyone else. Like the picture of the Bugatti in the rundown house is basically how you can describe Amora and Wolfsburg. And so, like bringing in Eriksen in could potentially just end up painting over that house, or he could actually help reduce the burden on Amora. But again, like the international break now provides time for these head coaches who are either in trouble or still relatively new in the job to kind of get their ideas across and fix areas before they either get ultimately sacked in November or they can turn things around. Speaking of being able to turn things around, it's what Horst Steffen has done at Werder Bremen. Bremen beat St. Pauli 1-0, so a bit of like a lower tier Nord derby. So things are finally coming together. Bremen are playing nice football. The younger players that they brought in are looking good. Again, Samuel Mbanguda scored here, and he's still not up to speed, but once he is, he'll be a very good asset for Bremen. This baptism of fire that Bremen basically went through in the early part of the season has now paid off, and obviously it helps that they have some elderly players coming back from injury, Marco Friedel, whatever, to help with these young players, but they're finally getting in the mix right and things are starting to come together. Do I think this is going to make Bremen a world beaters? Absolutely not. But I think with how bleak things look after the first 2 games of the season, I think this is a massive improvement, and Bremen will most likely survive now. And while St. Pauli, they were just really unlucky in front of goal, Bremen have somehow stumbled across a good goalkeeper in Karl Hein. He's on loan from Arsenal. He was good against Bayern last week, and he was good again here. So he's clearly an upgrade on Mio Backhaus, who was, again, kind of thrown in at the deep end until he got injured. Then in the Saturday afternoon game, it was Frankfurt versus Bayern, the standout game of the weekend. But again, Bayern were dominant. They won 3-0. Frankfurt were just comfortably beaten. It was too many errors for them. They were again not good enough in defence. In the past 4 games, they've conceded 16 goals, which is more akin to what a team fighting relegation will do than a team in the top half. So as good as Frankfurt have been up until now, their defence is too porous. And that was shown when Bayern scored after 17 seconds from Luis Diaz. Again, it shows that, what the hell are they doing? Carlos Santos doesn't really instill hope when in goal. It really makes you think, why aren't they playing Mikel Zetterer? I know Zetterer was in goal for when they lost to Union, but things need to change. Santos can be quite erratic, which was seen during the game against Bayern. Then the likes of, in defence, Robin Koch and Arthur Theat have not been as stable as you would like. Nathaniel Brown obviously leans more towards the wing back than the left back, and so going up against Michael Elise was a very tough ask. However, Orly Buta, who on the right, actually played quite well, and is more of a traditional right back than Nemandi Collins. But it again shows the lack of experience in this Frankfurt defence is blatantly obvious. And the fact that they make so many small errors and it costs them the 17 seconds. They could have done a lot better I'm pretty sure Bayern won the ball back for the second goal from a clearance. The third goal, it was good. There's not really anything you can do. And then what could have potentially changed the game was Frankfurt scored from Jean Bahoya, but Ritsu Doan had handled the ball in the process, and basically the goal was ruled out. However, if that goal stood, then things could have been completely different in this game, and potentially Frankfurt could have made a game of it. But this time, Luis Diaz was the standout for Bayern. He brings a lot his energy and directness that Bayern have been missing. Even the likes of Leo Zane and Kingsley Coman couldn't offer that. And you saw it with the third goal, where he receives the ball and takes on a couple of Frankfurt defenders before scoring and it was from a counter that Bayern scored from as well. And so it will be interesting to see how this dynamic, or this front 3/4, if you include Gnabry, so Diaz, Kane, Elise and Gnabry, have all kind of melded well together in the absence of Musiala. It'd be interesting to see how this dynamic will change once Musiala returns. Especially the dynamic of Diaz and Musiala, because obviously the left is sometimes areas where Diaz or where Musiala likes to play. Obviously with this win, Bayern maintained their 100% record to start the league, but they now have entered a difficult spell for them. Obviously beating Frankfurt is the first task they face, and they did it quite convincingly. But as I said earlier, they play Dortmund after the international break, then they play Borussia Mönchengladbach, who is traditionally their bogey team. Then they play Cologne in the Pokal, then they play Leverkusen in the Bundesliga, and then PSG in the Champions League. So the next month will probably be the toughest month yet, and probably toughest month of the season. And this will be, obviously Frankfurt was the start of this. And if they come through it unscathed, then, we're looking at the winners. Well, right now it's 80% Bayern will win. If they come through this with close to maximum points, or can extend, so they're currently 4 points clear of Dortmund. If they come out of this spell 9 points clear, then it's 95% that they'll win. Then on Sunday, it was basically all the teams who had played in Europe. On Thursday, Stuttgart played Heidenheim. They beat them 1-0. You can tell they're still kind of piecing things together. And they're still adjusting to the Thursday-Sunday dynamic. Bilal El-Khanous was once again one of the standouts for Stuttgart. He looks like a good buy. He's currently on loan, but that has an obligation. But obviously, El-Khanous and then Chamber Andres are the standouts. Andres this time started next to Karazor instead of replacing him. But, it's clear that, Karazor has to learn, come to Besiktas, buddy, because his career's over. Obviously, Karazor has to be played because of rotation option. But it's clear that in Stuttgart's best 11, it's now Andres and Stiller next to one another. And you have to play that as often as you can. Because if you do, you have a game-breaking duo. But for Heidenheim, they're going to be relegated. I think it's abundantly clear now. They've also adopted this anti-football approach, but they're just not really that good enough anymore. And so it's more than likely they'll be relegated. The standout result from Sunday saw Hamburg beat Mainz 4-0. They kind of had lift-off. Frankfurt have gotten used to Bundesliga football now. They know what it takes and how they're good. And after the initial adaptation period, they've kind of took off in the past few weeks, beating Heidenheim, beating Mainz now. And now they look like they will be able to survive. What's worth noting is Ryan Philippe's celebration. He kind of did a phone call and then pointed at the Hamburg badge because Mainz tried to sign Philippe in the summer, but I'm pretty sure the deal collapsed, which then allowed Hamburg to sweep in and sign him. But for Mainz, this is again warning signs. They look completely off the team that they were last season. The addition of European football does not help, but they just look way off it. And it's going to be a tough season for Mainz. Probably similar to how Heidenheim dealt with the Conference League last season, but Mainz are better than Heidenheim, so they really shouldn't be fighting relegation. In the weekend, it was Gladbach versus Freiburg. It ended 0-0. Gladbach is still winless, but obviously considering the results of last weekend, where they lost 6-4, this was a lot stronger defensive performance. They went 5-0 down at half-time. Eugen Polanski will stay on as head coach for now because Gladbach have prioritised hiring a replacement for Roland Wirkus, who's left. And once they have that replacement sorted, then the decision will be made on what you do with Polanski. But for Freiburg, they could have done better. This is a Gladbach side who are genuinely quite shit. And quite tragic at what they do. And so Freiburg should have really had the chance to score. But I think they obviously struggled because of fatigue, because they played in Bologna in midweek. And they did have their fair few set of chances as well, if it wasn't for Moritz Nicholas making a couple of saves. So Bayern, the table, Bayern is still top on 18 points. Dortmund are second on 14. Leipzig on third on 13. And Stuttgart are fourth on 12. And Leverkusen are up fifth on 11. So the top five is basically taking shape now. Then you've got Cologne, who are the upstarts, in sixth on 10 points. Then at the bottom, it's Heidenheim are last on 3 points. Gladbach are also last on 3 points. And they've still yet to win a game. While Mainz have dropped down into 16th on 4 after Augsburg won to take them away from the relegation playoff. Now, obviously, after the international break, the standout game is Bayern Munich versus Dortmund. There's no doubt about it. The Klassiker, whatever you want to call it. This will decide how this season goes on. And will tell a lot about this season. How good are Dortmund? How bad are Bayern? If Bayern are bad at all. And can Dortmund actually compete this season, or was it just a delusion we all told ourselves? Historically now, this fixture's in Dortmund's favour. But obviously this is a completely different side as well. Like Bayern Munich's side. Bayern Munich look like the best team in Europe at the moment. The question will be, can they compete with them, and can they show that after they faced each other, I think in April, that they're good enough? Like, there's this Nico Kovac team is good enough to compete, and we're looking at least a 2-horse race now instead of a 1-horse race. Elsewhere, Mainz play Leverkusen, Leipzig play Hamburg. On Sunday, Freiburg play Frankfurt, and to kick off the match day, Borussia Mönchengladbach play Union Berlin in the hope that, maybe this game they can finally win. So let me know what you think. If you think Dortmund could beat Bayern, how long can Gladbach go winless? Or whatever.